Hello, everyone. Welcome to FutureX. We're actually coming to you live from EDUCAUSE 2023 in Chicago. Lot of conversations happening here. Today we have Joe Sabado from UC Santa Barbara. I'm excited to have this conversation here today. You know, I follow Joe on LinkedIn. He's talking about the most innovative things. You know, we kind of are like brothers from another mother. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have. And we're really just going to have a candid conversation. If I walk around the booths here, everyone talks about AI. There's like an AI plug. And a lot of times we don't even know what the purpose of it is being done for that solution. So I think there is this opportunity for us to really understand it. And so today, you know, Joe, I'd love to have the conversation about the passion that is driving you. Because when I look at your frameworks and your posts, it has a different tone to it. And it isn't just technology. You're not just a deputy CIO that's just saying, hey, let me keep the lights on. Give me a little bit of your perspective. How did you get to this point of this perspective, and what is that perspective that is driving you to have these conversations with your constituents on campus as well as your colleagues in the market?
Right. Well, first of all, Matt, thank you so much for inviting me here. I follow Beyond Academics and the work that you all do from afar. Like you said, we've known each other we met maybe many years ago.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
still remember your passion, your energy when we met. So, I mean, when we started reconnecting on LinkedIn, I still remember that passion and I see that.
Yeah.
And so I look at your past guests and I also wonder, like, why am I invited here? But thank you for the opportunity.
You're really invited because, you know, a lot of people can just say what everyone else is saying.
Sure.
You're not saying what everyone else is saying,
Mm.
right? The posts are very thoughtful, and that's why you're here. You're here because I'd like for our audience to understand, you know, how to think slightly
Sure.
different. We have a lot of people who follow what other people are doing. What's the trend? Who's doing that? And sometimes you got to even go past the trends.
Right.
And that's why I wanted you to have that conversation with me, is to think about what are the things we should be thinking about
Sure.
that might be stepping you outside of the normal box that higher ed boxes themselves in.
Right. Well, that's a great question because, when I start having conversations with other folks about why do I do what I do and how do I think do I do, I start with my life mission, right? So my wife and I made this life mission statement many years ago, which is to make positive impacts globally through acts of education, inspiration, and compassion. That really drives the thought process that I have. So when you look at the work that I do, the things that I post, the frameworks that I present, it is really about that. It's about purpose driven and it's about focusing on people. So I think those are the things that sometimes we look at the technology and I often wonder, why are we doing this in the first place? In higher education, again, just sometimes it's piecemeal to say, oh, let's introduce AI for this reason, for that reason. But as a leader in higher education and someone who is an advocate for student success, I'm a first generation, I'm from a marginalized community. I think about the impact of those, the things that we innovate, introduce in higher education, and I think it from that perspective. Is it contributing to our purpose? What is our purpose in higher education? And what's the impact to the people who are going to be using this, producing these products? So that's where I come from.
Yeah. And you know, when we were just talking even before we were recording, you used the 3 I's: impact, intentionality, and to inspire.
Right.
Right? How do you think the next generation technologies play a role in doing that type of work, that inspiring, the intentionality of it, and the impact of it? Where do you see the technology that is on the horizon, maybe not even on the horizon?
Sure.
It's already here, right? With ChatGPT showing us how fast data is processing, how fast it's innovating, how it's thinking itself. Where do you see next generation technology playing in that life mission that you speak about?
Sure. Well, I think let's talk about innovation, right? People throw that word around, like, what does that mean? For me, it's something that you introduce. It could be a process, could be a technology, it could be something, but it's ought to improve how we do things now. So, with respect to future technology, I would hope that it would help us becoming more human again, which is kind of this, maybe it doesn't make sense, maybe, but in the world we live in where machines seemingly taking over, I'm hoping that, the next generation of technology would lead us to be more human. Let me give you an example. So many years ago at UC Santa Barbara, the financial aid director and I, we saw these lines. It's like 4 levels, four floors in front of financial aid office, and these are students who are often like from the low income and from marginalized communities, and so they're standing in lines for many hours, right? And so we call that time poverty.
Time poverty. That's interesting.
Right, time poverty. And so they're spending their time, waiting for someone to talk to them in maybe just even 30 seconds, right? Just to ask a question, like, is my form in? Did you accept my form? And so what we did was we introduced a product that allowed students to use their mobile phones and then to say, let me just scan this document because it exists. And the reason I'm saying that is because that colleague of mine reminded me that, financial aid is really one of the more emotional part of the university. We don't think about that because it's about money. But when you see people crying, when you see students crying outside, it's very emotional. And so the point I'm making here is that we can use technology to kind of do the redundant work that that are not as important, but what really is important is like about taking care of people.
I love where you're going because I always believe that we do a lot of work that humans do a lot of work that technology should do.
That's right.
Right? There's a lot of things that we do that are sequential, rule-based, mundane. I call it structured work. Right? We do a lot of that. And we don't let humans be humans to have the conversations they need to have. Right? So the fact that you just talked about the financial aid, person receiving financial aid, and that emotional tie.
Right.
But a human could be there to guide that person, that connection. And I think that's where higher ed is losing a lot of their power that they have, is that humans are doing the mundane work when they should be having the conversations, having, how do I help you through your journey here? How do I help you through that? So it's really interesting that you went to that element of it. And I'm a big believer that humans do have to do human work.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me give another example.
Yep.
So I was reminded by another colleague that said, it should be our goal for our students not to carry information from unit to unit.
Yeah.
Right? It could be in their head or through a piece of paper. And the reason why is that it's even more important for us to minimize that, because oftentimes the students who are doing that are carrying emotional, messages. It could be trauma. Imagine a student having to repeat the same message, traumatic message, from one department to the other. So how do we eliminate that or minimize that need for students to have to do that?
Yeah.
And technology can help in that.
So this leads me up to your frameworks. I've seen them. You have it on your website. What is it that made you create the framework, right? And tell the audience a little bit about what that framework, how is it segmented? What's the use cases in that? Because, when I read it, I'm like, wow, look at the power. Because I think people just think there's AI. But in your frameworks, you actually are saying, this is where the next generation technologies can be applied.
Sure.
I think this is a really important conversation that I think should be had in terms of it. Can you speak to us a little bit about the framework and how it's designed and how use cases come from that?
Sure. And so there's a couple of frameworks that I think you're alluding to. The first one is something that's not out there yet, but I think it speaks when I write. It's this idea of something I call it EPIC, right? EPIC. And so to me, I'm always looking at how to become an exemplar of someone that's a purpose-driven, that's for the P, inspired, which is the I, and conscientious, right? So epic. How do I become that person? And so I look at my world in that frame. It's always looking at how to inspire, how to be purpose-driven, and how do I come across different people? So that shows up in my writing and then when I speak. I have to give credits to different organizations when I look about the framework. This particular one I think you're talking about, one of them is called the Higher Education Reference Model. It's HER. It used to be called it. And here's the reason why I introduced that. is because, when I started following ChatGPT in November, 2022, I noticed that a lot of the conversations are happening inside the classroom, right, which I think is fair and I think is important, academic integrity. But student success to me is beyond that. And so for me as a leader in my own institution or in higher education, it's important to remind people that higher education is more than that, right? So there's the core capabilities, obviously, like learning and teaching.
Yep.
There's research, in research universities. Also the enabling capabilities, right? So that's is where like you look at a campus, and there's many different functions and capabilities that you can apply technology for the purpose that I talked about earlier. How do you become more efficient? How do you use technology to be more creative? Or how do you use technology to free up your very, very talented people, very engaged people, so that they can actually do the work that matters, which is talking strategically and building those human relationships.
So, so you now have talked about the capabilities operating more effectively
Yeah.
with technology, right?
Yeah.
That's inside of your framework.
Right.
You just talked about research, and there's a lot of institutions that are research one and very focused on research. How does next generation technologies help those type of institutions?
Sure. Well, I think if you look at research, there's so many different aspects to it, right? So, and that's where I think the higher education reference model comes in. So there is the active research itself, but then there's also the administrative portion, right? So how do you even get grants? How do you manage those grants? How do you make sure that you publish? How do you make sure that you're vetting the research so that's ethical, the peer review process? And then how do you disseminate it? And so if you look at all the different capabilities there, the different phases, technology can assist in all of that. And here's a good example. So let's look at data collection. What I think AI offers us is the insights to things that we don't see as human beings, right? And so that's one way to do that. The other piece too is automation, for example, or making things task more efficient, so that again our researchers aren't doing mundane
Yeah.
stuff. So they're not worrying about like where's my money coming in, right? Or it's my paycheck going through,
Yeah.
things like that. So
You're making them focus back on what they need to be doing, and it's the research. It's in front of them.
that's right. So
Yeah.
creating knowledge, disseminating knowledge.
So this is really good. So I love the fact that you said capabilities.
Right.
Because a lot of times we are requirement driven when we're looking at technology. Like, what requirement does this meet? What do I do today
Right.
that this technology can help me with? But what you just said is, what are the capabilities that you need to operate in a future ready campus, right?
Right.
It's that kind of concept. So if you were to talk about, you just listed out capabilities in research. Give me a little bit of capabilities in the operation side. What are those capabilities that you believe that AI or next generation technologies will help streamline or shift humans to do human stuff?
Yeah, I mean, one way to look at that is like the student life cycle, right? So you go from when they apply, or when they're even looking at the university, when they register, when they're managing their schedule, and then until they graduate. So each one of those capabilities have associated process that go along with that, right? So let me give and that's one thing. But let me give you an example with IT. We've actually been using AI for many years now. For example, our firewalls, right? So I mean, there's no way that a human being can look at every single attacks, vulnerabilities, and threats coming in. So there are technologies that like using AI to detect those anomalies at much faster speed that we can even do it.
In blink of an eye.
Blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one way to do it. The other way you do it is like, for example, I don't code that much anymore, but I still do a little bit.
Yeah.
So this is why I've used ChatGPT in a safe way, right? So instead of using, just taking the time to code myself, I said, ChatGPT, I would like to use this data from the spreadsheet and create a code to transform it this way.
Yeah.
Right. So in the past, it would have taken me about a couple of hours. In a minute or less, that code's generated for me. So now I'm spending a lot more time on what matters.
That's probably what spending time on what matters
That's right.
is probably the biggest thing that we have to think about. Now, when we think about learning, and I know we just touched on it, but I'd like to go into it. I know we don't talk about it. Everyone is afraid of what AI is going to do to learning. They're all
Sure.
afraid about, somebody's going to be cheating. And I always say, look, That's because we're in a earn it model,
Sure.
and we should be in a learn it model. You're worried about earning a grade, earning all these things. We have to shift it to a learn it model. How does the next generation technologies allow us to become a institution that can manage the learning element of it?
It's funny. Oh my God. And trust me, we did not talk about this beforehand.
Yeah.
But I just read a book called The Instruction Myth, right? And it did challenge the notion of, what are we really measuring, right? So we're actually measuring instructions.
Yeah.
We're not measuring learning. And so when I hear people talk about assessment, I think we're asking the wrong questions,
Yeah.
right? So it's like more of a question of like, how many hours did we spend, this student spend on doing this?
Yeah.
So that's the Carnegie units,
Yeah.
student hours. But really my question should be like, how are we measuring learning? Because at this point in time, I don't think we are. We measure like, how did they get good grades, this and that. But can you tell me, and I'm a lifelong learner,
Yeah.
right? So I want to know how much I've learned, and the years I've been in my profession. And so what are my competencies learned? So that's something I think AI can help us generate, because I want to see all the books that I read, right? And say, what are the themes that came out of that? And I want to follow that, so what has influenced me?
That's awesome.
And I can't do that on my own, but
Yeah.
I've read over 5,000 books in my lifetime,
Yeah.
more than that probably. I want to know what influenced me that I didn't even know what's influencing me.
Yeah, that's great. Because I think the next year we have to look at capabilities in all three: the learning, the research, and the operation side. And what are they? And we're going to really transform. Now, we're going to end this soon, but I want to ask this one question.
Yeah.
How do we get higher ed to adopt next generation technologies? How do we get our colleagues to recognize that instead of looking at requirements, that you got to look at capabilities and the opportunities? Now, we still need SISs, we still need
Sure.
ERPs, we still need all those. I'm not saying we don't need them. But how do we make those products even become next generation? So how do we get higher ed to adopt?
That's a loaded question, Matt. And that's something I know you cover a lot. It's a loaded question because it requires different levels of conversation. And I think, again, it starts with the purpose. I think we have to start from that level of like, why do we exist in the first place? And, in higher education, we offer many different things: knowledge, service to society, social mobility. So I think that should drive our conversation. On the other hand, we have to build this infrastructure and structure where people feel like they're safe to explore. And I think at times, we in higher ed espouse to be like the change makers.
Yeah.
But then when people tell us to change, we're not willing to.
Yeah.
And so it is this centuries old of traditional teaching methods and just higher education institutions that I think we need to get over.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to like, why do we exist? We have to. It's imperative for us to innovate, because if we're not, we're doing our disservice to our students and disservice to the society.
Yeah. So as we close up, Joe, give our audience your website so they can follow you on your website and even your LinkedIn, the way to find you on LinkedIn.
Well, yeah, thank you. So my website is joesabado.com, which is joesabado.com. So
Yeah,
that's right.
And you can find him on LinkedIn. Joe, I'm so excited that we were able to have this conversation. We need to have more of these.
Absolutely.
Have more dialogue. I'd like to say thank you to Joe for being with me here, and we'll see you on the next Future X.